Penguinzi Shalaknai. Ojri Dana Tizya Tramm Bajri. I just wanted to recognize the Algonquin territory we're on, Masi Cho, as a representative of my people, and as well as I think I'm safe to speak for other Yukoners as well for allowing us onto your territory. Might have meant something different 800 years ago if a bunch of Yukon First Nations came down this far. Also, my respects to the esteemed and honored guests and the leaders in the room, and then all the rest of you. I have less than 10 minutes with you, so I'm going to get right into the heart of the matter. And there's something that we haven't addressed in this room. It's just imagine two fish talking to each other. Let's say they're salmon. Another salmon swims up and says, "Hey, how's it going? Good morning. How's the water?" And they look awkwardly and say, "Yeah, good," and swim away. And the fish looks to the other fish and says, "What the hell is water?" Sometimes the greatest influences are the ones that are hardest recognized. And we have to remember that we're having these incredible conversations among like minds that are here with us now. I graduated from the Catalyst program in 2018 in Ontario, when at the time the Premier was taking wind generators out of the ground for all sorts of different reasons. We can only get so far as Indigenous peoples as our treaty partner is educated as well. We are both sides of the same coin, but there is overlap. And it's always like the way nature works. It banks on diversity and rewards cooperation. These are not weaknesses, they are strengths in bridging and finding the ways where the overlap exists between Indigenous ways of knowing and Western best practices. It is the Indigenous peoples across this world where our constitutions are written in the healthy streams, animal populations, and lands. That mandate is already there. When we speak as First Nations, we already have a certain benchmark, a base camp that other political and geopolitical organizations and tables are still struggling to establish that. I was at an international meeting where Mike Pompeo stood up and denied climate change outright at international tables, and I watched lead and senior delegates choke. How can we move a conversation forward? My community, we were the first in Canada as a self-governing First Nation to declare a climate emergency. We're going to do more than that, but let me take a moment to speak about this document. It came from the words of one of our elders. It cost me 10 cents and about 8 hours of work for this document. And when I looked to naming it, we looked through some books and I heard a quote from one elder, and right away it snapped into place. Yendo denito, jihijret nits o naan he a. And it means, after our time, how will the world be? And I think that's a great inflection, a wonderful way to leverage the mind and the heart to work together to really recognize where we are today and in this situation. Because do not be mistaken, what we're dealing with, and as I speak to you in the sixth extinction age designated from July 16th, 1945, it is either going to be nuclear or anthropogenic climate change that will severely hinder not just our species, but any modicum of a natural trajectory of where our modern society is today from the Industrial Revolution. This is so far encompassing that I liken it to the diagnosis of a terminal illness. The IPCC's sixth report is there. They have to work within specific science certainties. It was the largest effort by the UN, over 6,000 scientists in an interdisciplinary effort to create this document. That work is finished. We are all on the other side of the document, and I think we should mimic a bit of nature and the interdisciplinary work that was displayed in such a great effort. Now, when you get a terminal illness, the first thing that you're going to experience is anger. The second after that is the first one is denial. Then comes anger, then comes bartering, and then comes acceptance. If we're going to move on this issue, we each as individuals, as communities, as regions, and as territories and provinces, as a country and as a world, need to move through this as quickly as possible. But there is a lot of hope. More powerful than any government or any weapon is an idea that's time has come. And the ICE network is somewhat of the synaptic system that distributes ideas and fertilizes different communities, and from that, we all grow. We stand around these ideas. We stand out of the way of our truths, and as Indigenous peoples, we are able now to practice our Indigenous culture through contemporary technologies by breaking out of Indian Act thinking, stimulating local economies, and dealing with socioeconomics, while at the same time providing leadership in our regions. This now is a time for Indigenous peoples to step up in a geopolitical vacuum as other countries stumble and stifle over each other. In even recognizing a baseline, Indigenous people already have this. This is a major opportunity as we can circumvent political parties. We are not NDP, conservatists, or anything. And if you look at the landscape of Canada in and of itself, as Indigenous peoples at less than 1 million, 4.9% the population, we're not an election winner. Yet, there's a record-setting case of court cases won, which is not a good thing when we need the courts to educate federal ministers over the agreements that Canada had entered into. But we have the legal high ground. We have a relationship with the Crown. Canada is an implementer. But after 150 years and 27 modern treaties, we can see how, just imagine if all of our First Nations were empowered. That would push us far ahead on the climate issue. Backed up with entities like ICE, it can empower an already existing mandate to bring realizations for this country. In my community and in Yukon, we have an incredible solar panel project where we're selling photons back to a utility at 64 cents a kilowatt when we had purchased it for 78. That's parking $250,000 into our community each year that we are now reinvesting into other exponential projects. But to come back to my point, this climate declaration went very far. I'm now presenting to different local governments and municipalities across the country. There are ways to deviate, for instance, the kind of issue that we're in the Local Government Act. There is not parameters for a municipality to call a state of emergency around climate change. It's for something more sudden. And these are the antiquated tools that we're using for such a new and fast approaching issue. A climate declaration goes a long way into setting what the conversation is. And our document came from a place of power. It put the world on notice that on every table that Vantakuchin sit down on, from international tables to territorial tables to community tables, climate change will be the overarching principle, that we as a First Nation will get into the heart of the hardest issue, and we will display leadership out. We are not asking for money. We're not asking for anything. We are telling the world that this is our mandate. This is the way that we are moving forward. And this has changed conversations in the territorial political level. It's beginning to change conversations on the national level. The Assembly of First Nations have passed the same resolution. And just 5 days ago, the Alaska Federation of Natives in Alaska have now also passed this declaration. And when we do this as organizations, as municipalities, and this is where Indigenous peoples also come in, is that we don't trigger municipalities in the Yukon as a self-governing First Nation. On our land, we can make these declarations that ring international bells without being restricted by local government acts. This is the opportunity that Indigenous people have to use these tools, which we all use, our economies, existing technologies. You know, these money systems were never meant to be a bastille in which we are a slave to GDP. Where is our ingenuity as people? We can use these same tools. The tools that got us into this mess are going to be the tools that get us out. The only difference is when our hearts and our minds are connected around this issue, once we've gotten over our own internal issues and politics around this, then maybe it can be realized on national and international scales in an effortless sense. And if you ask me, 8 hours and 10 cents is a small price to pay to give that leadership and to recognize an issue that maybe some people have a hard time and maybe it's too easy, but you never want to be speaking over. The conversations need to be with each other, and it's going to involve industry. It's going to involve the people, and it's going to involve our leaders. And the more awkward the conversations are, the more that we need to have them. But the beautiful part about all of this is that we have the solutions, and not just sitting in this room. It is the youth in Indigenous villages. If you want to see the future of this country, look at your Indigenous villages, where we are amalgamating modern culture with our own. It's not happening in Vancouver or in Toronto, where they took down Inuksuks at the airport that were actually marking a gravesite. These conversations and our coming together is the major solution. People who are on the other side of the fence are the ones that we need to be speaking with. And establishing these networks set base camps so all of our communities can start to implement what we've already known, lived, and breathed from, and we can work together, because when that happens, that is when Canada comes to life. And we can show that Indigenous peoples are not just the foundational history of this country. We're not just contemporary innovators, but we are also the future of this country. Merci.